many years ago, I used to devote much of my time to doing television programs. It's a phase you go through, like sucking your thumb or wet. And I used to have a great pleasure in turning up on news programs. For example, in the 60s, this is a still from a 16mm film that I made of headlights in kids, and I showed it on TV. This is in black and white television days, and we discussed it. More recently, 30 years ago, Carol Vorderman, a girl on the right, came to my lab and we did a lengthy report about what the microscope can show. We shall see a little of Carol in a moment. She's great. She spends most of her time, although she's a brilliant mathematician and a gifted popularizer of science, but she spends most of her time on television hosting game shows and house makeover shows and reunion shows, because there isn't any market for what it is that her genius mind would ordinarily have to do. We were last together 2 weeks ago in the presence of Her Majesty the Queen and Princess Anne, who came with me to see a new microscope that has been built in Cambridge. And I had been in contact with the builders whilst it was being constructed, and they said, do come and see it. And so Princess Anne had a look, and they showed her how it worked, and she turned to me and she said, well, that's a pretty impressive piece of kit. And I thought, what a wonderful Princess Anne sort of comment that really was.
The onion will give us a living cell. Just take a piece of it and use that scalpel to pull away a bit of the top surface of the onion.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah. And then what do I do?
Just strip it back towards you. Now then, you see that little tiny thin bit that's come away? Lay it down on there.
That's the bit that's quite slimy when you cut up onions, isn't it?
How dare you speak of plant tissues like that? Now, I'm going to take a little drop of water. Now, I'm using a pipette, but any old common or garden eyedropper would do for that.
Right.
And then, with a little cover slip on top, like so. Mm-hmm. If we pop that under here, in place of the potato, you will see life as it is lived in the raw. Inside each cell, there's one on the left and two on the right there, you can see the nucleus, which of course is the controlling part of the cell. Let's just see if we can...
right in the middle.
That's right. Just see if we can find a better one. Now that is a particularly good cell. It's a perfect, typical example of a living cell.
But Carol is great. And look at this example from 30 years ago.
Maintenant l'interview de ce professeur gallois, Brian Ford, qui vous expliquera lui-même comment il a fait cette découverte. C'est une interview exclusive.
When earlier commentators have examined the writings of Leeuwenhoek, they have been handicapped in one very important respect. They have almost always used the microfilm copies from the letters and not looked at the original letters. And I knew that Leeuwenhoek would not be the kind of man who would simply send to London letters. He wanted to show how good he was. He must have sent some specimens. The first specimens that I found were against one of the earliest letters he ever wrote to London. There were 4 packets, and 2 of them, in fact, turned out to be fine sections. These were not, as many people have said, just crude chunks cut with a knife to help Leeuwenhoek fit them onto his microscope. They were fine sections. They were exceptionally fine sections. In fact, I must admit they are sections as good as you would expect to find cut in a laboratory today.
C'est lui, le génial inventeur Anthony van Leeuwenhoek, drapier et savant amateur du XVIIe siècle à Delft, en Hollande. Ces petits êtres vivant dans une mare peuvent être vus facilement à l'œil nu.
En passant à côté d'un lac marécageux, j'ai prélevé un peu d'eau dans une fiole en verre. En l'examinant à travers mes lentilles le lendemain, j'ai vu de très nombreux animalcules. Leurs mouvements dans l'eau étaient si rapides et si variés que c'était merveilleux à voir.
Ainsi découvrit-il le minuscule Bursaria, à peu près de la taille de la pointe d'une épingle. Dans son appareil digestif, on trouve des paramécies, un organisme unicellulaire, et c'est la première fois qu'on les voyait. Elles se déplacent en projetant des cils situés autour de leur corps. Et le halo qui entoure l'actinosphérium est en fait donné par les filaments gluants qui attrapent la nourriture. Et voici le volvox, colonie de plantes vertes minuscules groupées en rond. Comme tout découvreur, Van Leeuwenhoek a souvent dû deviner ce qu'il voyait.
J'ai vu plusieurs centaines d'organismes les plus malheureux qu'on puisse imaginer. En effet, ils étaient bloqués, empêtrés dans leur queue, et ils se débattaient en s'étirant violemment pour la dégager.
Orme dans du vinaigre avarié, pensant que c'était des minuscules anguilles, il faisait une découverte formidable. À Londres, ces observations surprenantes sont testées et confirmées par le maître anglais du microscope, Robert Hooke. Son microscope multiplie l'agrandissement en combinant les lentilles. L'œilleton, une lentille à l'intérieur du cylindre et en bas l'objectif dans un tube de cuivre. Une lentille condensatrice et un bocal rempli d'eau captent la lumière d'une lampe à huile et la fait converger sur le spécimen analysé. Ce qu'il a vu au travers du microscope l'a ravi. Ainsi, il a vanté la beauté de la puce.
Le microscope montre clairement que la puce est entièrement revêtue d'une armure noire, curieusement polie et hérissée de fines pointes. La tête est embellie par des yeux noirs, vifs et ronds, et deux antennes tactiles et olfactives.
I hope you'll forgive me letting that run in French, but it's just a beautiful piece of film. We managed to put together a series of 16mm movies of Carchesium and Volvox and the other organisms that gave the viewer an impression of what it was that these people were really looking at.